And that is absolutely a perfect segue, because a lot of what you were talking about, the contextual nature of what you're doing for MDM, is equally applicable to the type of apps and services that you're doing. And what we took was a very complex concept, this contextually aware mobility, that basically getting two different experiences based on who you are, what you are, where you are, when you are, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, all these things that, and I'll kind of give you an example. You go to Walmart, if you're at home and an app, you're looking at the Walmart app, you're going to get one experience. The moment you step in the store, that app becomes an in-store experience. It's just one simple example of a contextual type app, but it can obviously become this big rat's nest of what are you going to do and who and all the rest of it. What our group did a great job of is taking all these issues and all these concerns and all that and really summarizing it into a context, a platform to look at it so that you can, when you're thinking about contextually aware mobility, what do you got to think about? What are the questions? What are the issues that you need to accomplish? So starting with the core of it, what? Because there's all these phones, as we discussed in there, they're collecting all kinds of data, passively, actively, all the rest of it. There's all kinds of data coming in. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's accomplishing anything. You really need to think about what your mission is, because that's going to form everything else on the whole process. You don't just do something because you got the data. You all have missions to accomplish. So identify that. That's a starting point. Then the who. And this is where it really gets into the security and all the other issues. Who are you? What's your role? Are you civilian or government? One of the big eye-openers for me is there's a lot of data out there. We keep thinking about the government employee there, but there'll be times, certainly, when there's civilian data that's available from the device, or maybe appropriate to be accessing that information in emergencies, those sorts of things. So you can't just think of a role-based, I'm a so-and-so employee and this is the access I got. Clearance, rights, and it doesn't have to be a human. There's a lot of these machine-to-machine that you're hearing more about. That can be the who, is this device that's monitoring this pollution or whatever that may be. Okay, then the next is the where. And I thought where was going to be simple, where you locate it. And there is nothing simple with contextual mobility, because you've got to think about, okay, the physical location of the device. You've got to think about where the network is, because that's data transferring over is the where. The device itself, the physical location, the environmentals, but most important is where is it in context to what you're trying to accomplish. If you are in a secure military facility, the where isn't I'm at this geolocation. It's, oh yeah, this geolocation corresponds to a secure military facility. So thinking about that broader context of where you are in relation to the location of where this activity is occurring is real critical as you're going through this path of deciding how you're going to accomplish the what, the mission. The when, again, I think it's just time, but it's in context. It's the appropriateness. For example, does an employee have access to this information at 5:30 in the afternoon? Or is their day over and they shouldn't have access? Is the when, how frequent should they be going to that? If they're doing this big massive download dump 3 times this week, when that's out of context of what they're supposed to be doing, is that permitted? And of course, just the pure time. When are you doing it, and does it make sense to the information that's being presented back to you? The why, again, I thought, okay, fairly straightforward. Why am I doing this? It's tied to the mission, and it's not necessarily. Because why becomes a very important question. Who's your target audience? Why is it? Because you got to think about the data you're collecting. You're collecting all kinds of data. Is it for Congress? Is it for the president? Is it for your mission? What is the context of why that data? Because that's going to help identify the accuracy of the data, how precise, who needs to review it, all those informations. And then the how. So again, the who, where, when, why, how. It's really the end point. Are you providing the data that the user needs to accomplish the mission in the format that they can use? Are they in a plane? Are they on the ground? Do they expect to print it? Is it in the right language? Is it going to be read by another machine? Again, you can't just make that assumption that if I got the data and I'm collecting it, who's got it, who has access, the end result's going to accomplish what you need to do. So again, kind of summarizing it, it's what's the mission, who's accessing the data, where's the data coming from, and who's going to get that data, where's it coming from, in the context of what's happening, when is it being done, why is it being done, and then how is it being accomplished. If you can answer those questions as you're going through it, and you have to answer all of them, you can't, one of the things I leave, because you got to have answers to all those, then you can start figuring out the type of security you need, who has access, what's the best tool to collect that information, all those things. Anybody in the group, did I miss anything? Doug?
I think one of the things is security is one part of it, but also what additional value can you deliver by analyzing and proactively delivering results with that data.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because there's so much data. The one thing we kept talking about is wearable devices and mobility. I mean, these concepts are nothing new. I mean, they've been there, but it was a lot simpler when it was a desktop. The one thing we talk about is the complexity of all these different devices, all these different sources of data, monitors and all that. Now this takes on a much harder process to figure all this out to accomplish the mission. But the mission is much more open now. There's a lot more things that are being done in the data, and the data doesn't need to be in silos. The business side is what's driving a lot of this, not the IT side. What does business want to need, and who has access to what information to accomplish the mission?
Is there a component to it where, like, you look at 98% of the data that's out there, and you're like, this is just, it's not that it's irrelevant, it's just not sensitive enough for this level of scrutiny. So there's also, you know, I thought about just applying these things to that 2% or that 1%. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think the point, it kind of, we struggle with it because you got the passive data that all, you know, geolocation, there's no way, I mean, there's lots of data being collected out there, but does it tie into a mission and access? You can't stop, I mean, one of the things we learned about, talked about is, you can't stop the data from being collected. I mean, whether you're a carrier or somebody else, the data's out there. Now, there may be certain functions that are not triggered on or off, depending on what type of security, but there's data. What does it do to accomplish the mission? And if it's irrelevant to the mission, then yeah, probably lower security, or you're not looking at the data in the first place.
I was going to say too, in a sort of a contextual sense, you know, you're consuming information, right? For some needs to the point where you want to extract the value, or there's some sort of value in making a decision or taking some action or doing something. So by doing that, you know, taking that action or making a decision, you're sort of changing the environment to which all the other people that are subscribing to that information now are going to need that updated information to make their decisions from, or to use in their decision-making process. So this whole, you know, SOA and notion of consuming and producing information, you know, that's kind of where the contextual value comes in, right? Is I'm going to do something with it. It's going to have some sort of value to me.
And we talked about having to go through the cycle again once the data is there, the who, what, where, when. It's not a one-time, I got it, I went through that, but the end user now, do they have access? You went through it when the collection of data, transmission, end user, what after their product, who, what, where, when, how, why, all those things.
So I have a question. So
Sure.
as you talk through kind of the process of things to consider when building out your Contextually app, what's your recommendation on getting that thought process embedded into existing government system engineering processes, making sure that the commercial world can ask the right questions, has tools? Are there any recommendations from the group on how the government should actually start to implement that thought process in the day-to-day development?
I don't know if there was any recommendations from the group. I think they talked through the challenges of how fast technology, I mean, Google Glass and all the rest of these are happening. How does government keep up with the data, especially since the private sector is collecting, doing those things with the data, and maybe the government's accessing that data from the private sector? How do you do those things? I mean, it wasn't a joke, but one individual raised the question, can the context of all these, the who, what, where, can that be outsourced to a contractor to think through all those things? Because maybe they can move through this faster going through that, because it's not easy. All these factors, I mean, our board was just covered with those things. Would that make sense for a trusted contractor to go through that and help identify, at least narrow it down so you're not eating the whole elephant, but a bite of the elephant by the agents.
Or it could be just simply saying, hey, I don't really care how the information is delivered or even how it's produced. I just want this service and I just want to consume this service, and I'm going to write a consumption contract and I just expect this, I'm going to consume this kind of information.
In service, I don't care how you get
How
there.
you did, whatever. And, I think the whole notion of, contextual basis is something that you could probably, the government could probably write in, RFIs and RFPs to say, hey, I really don't care. This is the value that I need to get out of the condition of the data or whatever.
Especially since there's so many ways to get to it.
Or even to enable these kinds of decisions, something abstract like that.
And the Colonel kept this very straightforward and simple.
I would say focus on the decision maker. Specifically, who are they? What decision do they want to make that they're uncertain, and they want to gather information to reduce their uncertainty. You have sidewalk, you have a supplier, input, process, output, customer. They're going to go through a decision-making process. And if their degree of uncertainty is unsatisfactory to them, they're going to want information to reduce their uncertainty. So I would say, in a nutshell, focus on the decision maker.
It's a good way, because otherwise it becomes too big, overwhelming.
Sure.
But with these things going through that process, all the advantages, because there is a ton, now we talked about it, there's so much data out there, there's so many more things that can be accomplished. It adds to complexity, but it also has many, many benefits.
Great. Any further questions for Nolan? Questions?
So since policy was made a big bugaboo, has anyone really figured out how to actually do policy so it's not written monolithically on stone, but it really is going down to the data owner and saying that they do the risk assessment? Because if you look at most government policy now, you'd have so many if-then-else clauses in this policy that I'm not sure you could ever tell whether anyone was compliant. I mean, so how do we do the reality that says policies like binary yes or no type situations into being able to have policies that really do react to a risk framework with situational determinations?
Yeah, we certainly didn't come up with any magic solutions to it, but one thing that did open my eyes is not focusing so much on it, the device that's capturing it, because it's so easy sometimes to get focused, well, it's a smartphone, tablet, all that, but actually the data is really the fundamental. I mean, where's the data coming from, how it's being collected, what's being done with it, and driving the policy to the data, not so much the device and some of those other things that sometimes comes to the forefront of discussions. But it's a big challenge, as you point out.
Okay. Any more questions for Nolan? Okay, thank you.